Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to PBC and welcome to a special show that we're broadcasting today. The topic of the show is in relation to the revelation Canadian Premier Justin Trudeau made in the Canadian House of Commons on Monday afternoon, and that was that the Indian government had a hand in the assassination, a suspected hand in the assassination of Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So if we cast our minds back to June, as a community, as a COM, and as diaspora, we were made aware of the shooting outside the Gurdwara in Surrey of Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who was a prominent activist, well known in Canada, also Muksevadar of his Gurukar as well. So a well-respected Sikh leader. Um, there was immediate suspicion, which we'll discuss in the show, following his death. And almost 3 months later, we find ourselves in a situation where the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has now revealed that the Canadian government um, is almost suspecting India of the assassination. Now, it doesn't come as news to us, but it certainly has opened the door and interest of the mainstream, which is a bit of a different dynamic and something that we haven't really been experiencing for a while. So I have with me a really esteemed group of people who are going to participate in the discussion. So we have from Canada, Bhai Prabjot Singh. Bhai Prabjot Singh is editor of Panth Punjab and also Muksevadar or Sevadar, sorry, of Khalistan Center. We also have Jas Singh from the Sikh Federation and also the founder of the Sikh Network and a well-known active Sevadar here. And then we have Bhai Devindajit Singh, OBE. So Bhai Sahib is very well known. He's been representing us on the media circuit, mainstream media circuit over the last couple of days. Really, we've seen Bhai Sahib's interviews, and again. Sevadar of the Sikh Federation UK and also co-founder of the Sikh Network. So, Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Ki
So, Bhai Prabjot Singh, I think it's probably makes sense if we start with your contribution really because you are from Canada. So for us, Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar, although we feel so close to him now, following his Shaheedi, I didn't meet him. I don't know if Jazz or the Bindajit Singh did, but maybe you could give us a little bit about his persona, how he was, and how he was seen by the community.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important question to start with. ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਸ ਮਸਲੇ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਵੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਲੈਵਲ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੀਡੀਆ ਹੈਗਾ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਐਸਟੈਬਲਿਸ਼ਮੈਂਟ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਮੁਲਕਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਪ੍ਰੀਟੀ ਮਚ ਅਰਾਊਂਡ ਦ ਵਰਲਡ ਉਹ ਇਹ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਬਾਰੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਬਾਰੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਬਾਰੇ ਤੇ ਭਾਈ ਹਰਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਬਾਰੇ ਉਹ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਨਿਰੰਤਰ ਜਾਰੀ ਹੈ ਪਿਛਲੇ 2 ਦਿਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ And so we're having this kind of intensity and this flurry of media coverage that's about us. They're talking about us, and the conversations are centering, our citizenship, or they're pretty much centering the sovereignty of Canada. They're centering the interests of like G7 countries and what all these countries are going to do. So ਆਪਣੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੀ ਸੰਗਤਾਂ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਭਾਗਾਂ ਵਾਲੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਪਰਾਲਾ ਕਰਕੇ ਵੀ PBC ਵਰਗੇ ਮੰਚ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਖੜੇ ਕੀਤੇ ਆ because ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਮੌਕਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਗੱਲ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਆਪਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਾਂ ਵਿਚਾਰ ਵਟਾਂਦਰਾ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਕਰਨਾ ਤੇ ਆਪ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆਪਣੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਸੋ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਸਟਾਰਟਿੰਗ ਆਫ centering by Hardeep Singh is critical to this conversation because for us the important thing isn't about a revelation about foreign interference ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕਈ ਦਹਾਕਿਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਪਤਾ ਵੀ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦੀਆਂ ਚਾਲਾਂ ਕਿਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਮੁਲਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਹੋਇਆ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਆਸਟ੍ਰੇਲੀਆ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਖੁਫੀਆ ਏਜੰਸੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤੰਤਰ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਕਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਦੇ ਢਾਂਚੇ ਬੁਣੇ ਹੋਏ ਆ So I think talking about Hardeep Singh is important because he really represents the significance of the moment we're in right now as a COM. ਐਂਡ ਹਿਜ਼ ਲਾਈਫ ਹਿਜ਼ ਸੇਵਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਘਾਲਣਾ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਦੀ ਹਸਤੀ ਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਪ੍ਰਤੱਖ ਰੂਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜੀਵਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਦੇਖਣ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਆ ਸੋ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਬਚਪਨ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਘਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਵਾਲਾ ਮਾਹੌਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੋ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਦੁਆਬੇ ਦੇ ਇਲਾਕੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਪਿੰਡ ਜਲੰਧਰ ਦੇ ਲਾਗੇ ਪੈਂਦਾ ਸੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਘਰ ਇੱਕ ਖਾਸ ਠਾਰ ਸੀ ਜੁਝਾਰੂ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਦੀ ਸੋ ਆਪ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਭਾਈ ਨੋਕ ਸਿੰਘ ਬੱਬਰ ਦੇ ਹੱਥਾਂ 'ਚ ਪਲੇ ਆ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੋਦ ਦਾ ਨਿੱਘ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮਾਣਿਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸੰਗਤ ਮਾਣੀ ਆ so it's starting off from understanding the foundations of his home. His connection with the Sangharsh started from a very, very young age, where their house was an actual safe house for Jujaru Singhs during the movement. ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਹੋਸ਼ ਸਾਂਭੀ ਆ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਖੁਦ ਸਰਗਰਮ ਹੋਇਆ ਭਾਈ ਗੁਰਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀਪਾ ਹੇਰਾਂ ਭਾਈ ਕੁਲਵੀਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਬੜਾ ਪਿੰਡ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਰਗਰਮ ਰਿਹਾ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਕਮਾਂਡੋ ਫੋਰਸ ਦੇ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਤੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਜਦੋਂ 95 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਦੋਂ ਬਿਆੰਤੇ ਦਾ ਸੌਦਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਭਾਜੀ ਦਾ ਨਾਮ ਵੀ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਤੇ ਉਸ ਕਾਂਡ ਤੋਂ ਉਸ ਕਾਰਵਾਈ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਉਸ ਐਕਸ਼ਨ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਹੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਛੱਡ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਰਫੀਜੀ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਆਏ ਸੀਗੇ so he came as a refugee he had been arrested he had been persecuted he faced torture personally himself as well he came to Canada as a refugee ਇੱਥੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਵੀ you know a lot of people come to these western countries they establish themselves they establish their lives and their families ਭਾਜੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਦੇ ਦਿਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਂਭ ਕੇ ਰੱਖੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਜੋ ਬਾਕੀ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਸਾਂਝਾ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਵੀ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਛੱਡਣ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜੁਝਾਰੂ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਦੇ ਸਾਥੀਆਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਭਾਈ ਜਗਤਾਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਤਾਰਾ ਵਰਗੇ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਅਦਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਦੇਸ਼ ਛੱਡ ਚੱਲੇ ਆ ਪਰ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਡਾ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਆ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਸੇਵਾਵਾਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਜਾਰੀ ਰੱਖਾਂਗੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਅਖੀਰਲੇ ਸਵਾਸਾਂ ਤੱਕ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵਾਅਦਾ ਆਪਣੇ ਸਾਥੀ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਨਿਭਾਇਆ So he was somebody who was at the forefront of Panthik Seva har ek khetar de vich. He can't be limited to one organization or one type of seva. ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਪੰਥ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਪੰਥ ਦੀ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਲਾ ਬਣਾ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਪਦੀਆਂ ਸੁਤੰਤਰ ਸੰਸਥਾਵਾਂ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਖੜੀਆਂ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ ਨੌਜਵਾਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਤਿਆਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਤੌਰ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਹਰ ਇੱਕ ਖੇਤਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਸ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਜਾਰੀ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਰੱਖਣਾ and so he faced a lot of challenges personal obstacles because of it a lot of harassment surveillance by Canadian intelligence and security agencies at the behest of India and I think that's one of the important things that we need to unpack is the collusion the responsibility of Canadian officials Canadian agencies in letting this issue kind of get to this point. So in terms of being put on no-fly lists, being surveilled and harassed by security agencies, by pretty much being denied the right to bank at certain places, he really saw it all. And last year, in the summer of 2022, there's a number of Naujawan in the Lower Mainland and BC who were approached by what's called INSET. So it's an integrated national security enforcement team. So it's pretty much a multi-agency team of the RCMP, CSIS, Community Security Establishment, all of these kind of major security and intelligence agencies in Canada that are specifically focused on national security issues. So it was INSET that actually came to Bhai Hardeep Singh in the summer of 2022, so 1 year ago, warning him of an imminent threat to his life. But they wouldn't give any further information and they wouldn't provide any actual assistance or protection themselves. So pretty much 1 year ago, or over 1 year ago now, these Naujawan in BC were warned that by national security agents in Canada that there's a threat to their life. No action was taken, and we know that on June the ਵਿੱਚ 18 ਜੂਨ ਨੂੰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਬਾਹਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤ ਦਾ ਜਾਮ ਪੀਤਾ. So I think centering his life, his kalana, and kind of that full arc of where he started from, those foundations, the ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੰਗਤ ਦਾ ਕਰਿਸ਼ਮਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਵਾਪਰਿਆ ਭਾਈ ਨੋਕ ਸਿੰਘ ਬੱਬਰ ਵਰਗੇ ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਦਾ ਭਾਈ ਗੁਰਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੀਪਾ ਹੇਰਾਂ ਦਾ ਸੰਗ ਮਾਣ ਕੇ ਜੋ ਪ੍ਰਭਾਵ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਪਿਆ ਤੇ ਬਾਕੀ ਜੋ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਦੀ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪਣੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਪ੍ਰਭਾਵ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਨੌਜਵਾਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਤੇ ਬਾਕੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਹੋਰ ਨੌਜਵਾਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਛਾਪ ਛੱਡ ਕੇ ਉਹ ਗਏ ਆ ਤੇ ਆਪਣੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਨਿਭਾਈ ਸੀਗੀ ਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਮੋਢੇ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਹੁਣ ਧਰ ਕੇ ਆਪ ਗੁਰਪੁਰੀ ਸੁਧਾਰ ਗਏ.
I mean that's an amazing background, and it's important to understand, as you mentioned, Faisal. And the Vindijit Singh or Jazz, any of you want to comment on this? It's interesting to note this is that Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar was a child of the Sangharsh. He obviously experienced a lot more, than other people would. Um, and this persecution that we now see of people who were born during that era, who basically experienced firsthand the atrocities that took place during the 80s and the 90s. Um, Now we're seeing them um, facing persecution just because they're linked to those families, or linked to people who were prominent during the 80s and the 90s. And certainly, I think that's also the case with Bhai Avtar Singh Kanda. So, do we see a pattern here where that sort of torment and that sort of it carries on, even though these people have sort of moved on and sort of developed in the Sangharsh or the Morcha into sort of different fields.
But hey, should I just pick up where Prabjot Singh left it? And he did really well switching between English and Punjabi because I either do one or the other and it feels uncomfortable. ਪਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੱਲ ਪ੍ਰਭਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਅੱਜ ਆਪਾਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਖੜੇ ਆ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸੰਗਤਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਦਰਸ਼ਕ ਪੀਬੀਸੀ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਮੰਨਣੀ ਪਊਗੀ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਆਪਣਾ ਰਾਜ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਸਿੱਖ ਹੋਮਲੈਂਡ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਇਹ ਕੋਈ ਮਾੜੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਚੱਕ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਐਕਸੈਪਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਫਿਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਦੂਸਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਦੱਸ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਚੀਜ਼ ਚੰਗੀ ਆ ਲੋਕ Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar in his shahadat, had he not become a Shaheed on the 18th of June, we probably wouldn't be sitting here talking about what's happened in the last 2 or 3 days. So in his shahadat, he's actually done another seva, that the international media is asking questions about what is Khalistan. And I think the thing that has been missed so far, but it's our duty individually and collectively, is to say Sikh Raj, a Sikh homeland, a Sikh kingdom is nothing new. And I think in Britain, we understand that better than most because Inan Raj apna khoya si. Inan apna Raj apanu offeru kita si 1947. So I think it's only a matter of time that the mainstream media really gets into the issue of what is wrong or what is right of having a Sikh homeland, because our history tells us under Maharaja Ranjit Singh there was no better Raj. And I think once this gets out in the mainstream, then those that may doubt the need for a Sikh homeland within our own community, you will see them jump on board. And I think that's our biggest opportunity and challenge at the moment, is if we can make that breakthrough to mainstream, to start talking about why a Sikh homeland, why Sikhs are a freedom-loving people, then I think we will see those same governments that Justin Trudeau today has been talking to at the United Nations about why he did what he had to do on Monday, is they'll be saying, actually, there are huge benefits for the world of having Sikh Raj, a Sikh homeland, where we can take that concept of Sarbata Bala and demonstrate to the world that where Sikhs lead, they lead people in the right direction. And I think, through adversity, through the shahadat of Bhai Hardeep Singh, we have a massive opportunity to actually break that demonization that India has been doing of Khalistanis and has actually put those into the minds and hearts of governments around the globe. And ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ Twitter account ਨੂੰ follow ਕਰਦੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ shared ਇੱਕ speech John Watts ਦੀ 1989 ਤੋਂ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਿੰਘ ਸਭਾ ਸਲਾਹ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਡੇ ਤੇ ਸੁਣੀ ਹੋਊਗੀ, ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਸਰਕਾਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣਾ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਦੱਸਦਾ, ਫਿਰ ਇੱਕ ਪਾਸੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਅੱਤਵਾਦੀ ਕਹਿਣਗੇ, ਪਰ ਰਾਤੋਂ ਰਾਤ ਫਿਰ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਫਰੀडम ਫਾਈਟਰ ਕਹਿਣ ਲੱਗ ਪੈਂਦੇ ਆ। ਤਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਸ ਕਹਿ ਲਓ ਕ੍ਰਾਸ ਰੋਡ ਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਖੜੇ ਆ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਜਸਟਿਨ ਟਰੂਡੋ ਨੇ ਤਾਂ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਮੌਕਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਵੀ ਭਾਈ ਹਰਦੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਦੇ ਸ਼ਹਾਦਤ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਆਪਣਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੰਜ਼ਿਲ ਆ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ, ਉਹ ਨੇੜੇ ਆ ਗਈ।
Hmm. Jazz, are you seeing a change in the reporting as well as because you've been with the mainstream, you've been in the media, in the limelight. So how's it coming to you?
Yeah, I think to start with, I think first of all, you never get tired of hearing about the jeevanies of amazing Gursikhs like Bhai Hardeep Singh, Bhai Avtar Singh, who we were all closer to. But when you hear and you reflect on it, I think you naturally get inspired by it. And the point you made at the start was they all left their homes. They were survivors of a genocide, survivors of a state-sponsored persecution, and they were turned into and demonized into extremists themselves. I mean, just the logic of that is just nonsensical. And this is nothing new. This is the Indian textbook 101 operation, is that they commit the crimes, and first they demonize the whole community. They will then go in and eliminate that community, and then they blame any survivors of that community for fighting back and standing up for themselves. And it's shocking how Western governments have, let's just say, I can't say they've been fooled by it, because no one's that blind and no one's that stupid, but they've certainly ignored it, and they've chosen to ignore it. And as Prabhjot said, is that this has been happening and has been increasing largely since Modi came into power, but particularly since 2015, when he came into the UK and they shared this dossier. And since then, you saw activities ramp up against Sikh activists in Canada, in America, in the UK, and in Europe. And within that time period, you saw Jagtar Singh Jal be abducted in 2017. We saw the homes of 5 Sikh activists raided in 2018. And then we had the failed extradition attempt to remove 3 British-born Naujwans in 2021 to India. And now what we're seeing was the direct attack on Bhai Avtar Singh Khanda, and 4 days later on Shaheed Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And I think all of that has been issue after issue, and we've been firefighting for so long that we've kind of got used to how the Indian government operate and its tactics. But it's like on Monday, the world woke up to those tactics. And suddenly, mainstream media channels, I mean, just talking, we've spoken to over the last 48 hours, the Telegraph, Times, the FT, the Daily Mail, the BBC, Sky News, and I've probably missed 3 or 4 of those, ITV. So all the major channels, and we've seen in Canada, CBC and all the other Canadian channels, Toronto Star, all of them cover this story, and it's gone Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. So this is now major international news, and that is all because of the Qurbani of Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar, and also of Avtar Singh, because the calls I've been taking over the last 48 hours have all been asking questions of, okay, who was Hardeep Singh? And how does that connect to the UK? And they were so interested in Avtar Singh Khanda's death and the suspicion around that. And when you tell them and you draw those lines and tell them how everything is connected, I think most journalists I've spoken to have been shocked, and they've only started to pay attention. And which shows you that a lot of Sikh story, even though we've been doing the work, issuing press releases, it's on all the social medias at the time, it doesn't really register with mainstream, because we're A, a minority, and B, it's not the line the state wants you to pursue. We've certainly seen the government in this country has gone against the concerns of our community and effectively started to target themselves. But what we've seen today over the last 48 hours really is a U-turn by the mainstream media. And now they're asking those questions that Prabhjot and Devinderji mentioned around what is Khalistan, what does it mean? And when you tell them in the most simplest terms, we're asking for the exact same that half the Scottish population is asking for. That they just want to have their sovereignty and the ability to determine their own future. And when you then add in, but Scotland hasn't suffered a genocide in the last 30 years. We've suffered 3. And that starts to sort of resonate. And then journalists start to put that in perspective and they understand the struggle. So we've gone into real issues around not only the Indian interference, the extent of it, but also how much they've got their claws or the complicity of the British government, particularly. And if we talk about Justin Trudeau's statement in the Commons on Monday, and we said this earlier, is groundbreaking. And I think the benefit or the impact of that speech will be felt for many years to come, because it changed the political landscape. You now have got Canada, America, Australia, and slowly, like a dog wagging its tail, the Brits that are now going to be calling India out and are questioning how it operates in foreign soil. And when you bring the evidence that we have, whether it was the suspicious deaths of Darcy and Kunda, the cover-up by the UK government, and we touched a lot of that, and that's been addressed in the mainstream media here, that they refused to do the autopsy, they refused to open a police investigation, that they hindered a private autopsy and post-mortem happening. They then blackmailed the family to accept a death certificate just so to get Mataji and Benji over for the funeral, but then quickly refused that decision. So they've really abused and manipulated the situation to their benefit, that the truth can be hidden. But we all know that the truth will always prevail. So I think hearing these, I won't even say stories, but hearing these facts has really opened the eyes of a lot of journalists, and they are now asking really tough questions of this government, and rightly so, because as I'm sure the impact in Canada is just as profound, if not greater, that this is just touching the iceberg of what Justin Trudeau has done. And
have we sorry to interrupt. I'm just thinking, have we been here before as well with the 84 revelation, with the papers coming out in 2014, where we thought we had reached a bit of a peak and there was more mainstream interest, but that sort of slowly fizzled out. Obviously, this is on an international level. This has opened a lot more discussion. But I mean, Prabhat Singh, Canada, the people of Canada. Does this change their perception of the movement and how Sikhs have been demonized in the past, or do you think it would become just business as usual? It'll be of interest now, but in months to come, it would just sort of get removed from the public consciousness again, and we're back to where we've always been.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a turning point. Things can't go back to normal at this point. There have been other revelations before. We've had parliamentary committees and intelligence agencies explicitly state that India is a top actor of foreign interference. We've pretty much, Canadian agencies and institutions have uncovered specific actors, specific type of clandestine operations to influence elections, to influence policymakers, to surveil and intimidate activists in Canada. That's kind of has been kind of pushed off to the side always. That it's been in the background and it's existed. What we have now is we have a sitting Canadian Prime Minister stepping into the House of Commons and kind of in unison with all of the leaders of opposition, outright stating and condemning India for its role in conducting an extraterritorial killing of a political dissident who was a Canadian citizen. So I think kind of just from all metrics, from all perspectives, things can't go back to normal. And this doesn't necessarily automatically mean a win for us, and our objectives or our strategy is going to be successful in terms of what we want. We're going to have to work for it. And I think that's one of the most important things to understand. ਵੀ ਇਹ ਜਿਹੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੌਕੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਪਿਛਲੇ 3 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਚ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖ ਲਓ, we won't even go further than that. We've seen massive cascades of interest, of political mobilization on the ground in Punjab and out here in the diaspora. Kisan Morcha ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ, even if you look at everything that kind of happened during the COVID, the pandemic, you look at the assassination of Bhai Hardeep Singh, the Shaheed of Bhai Avtar Singh Khanda, and these revelations coming out. You're seeing a consistent, steady flow. And so I think it's important for us to kind of take a step back and not miss the forest for the trees. This is one incident, and the story for us right now, Panthak Manch te baithe hoye, it's not necessarily just about Trudeau's statement. It's for us to step back and reflect, where are we as a Qaum right now? Where is our Sangharsh? So, what are the kind of the threats and opportunities we face right now, and how do we build and kind of make sure that we're moving in the direction that we want? Everything is going to be the shifts and changes that we're seeing in media coverage of interest, the language that's used, the kinds of subjects that are being interviewed and stuff. If you look at 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. But the reason that's happened is because there's been sustained institutional activity where you have activists on the ground who are working on this day in and day out. This ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਮੰਜ਼ਲ ਭਾਈ ਦਵਿੰਦਰਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਭਾਜੀ ਨੇ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ, ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਖਾਲਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੀ ਮੰਜ਼ਲ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, it's not going to fall in our lap because of intense kind of newsworthy moments like this, nor is it going to happen through sound bites. It's going to happen through grueling, thankless, invisible work on a daily basis to develop our institutions and our response mechanisms, and eventually to get to that stage where we're actually able to not just react to these kinds of incidents, but we're actually engaging as the Tera that we are. Looking at Bhai Hardeep Singh's shahadat and all of this conversation around his assassination should solidify very clearly and sear something into our minds. We're past the point of having conversations of whether Khalistan is legitimate or whether Sikhs want it or not. We're trying to convince people or talk about what happened to us 20, 30 years ago. Obviously, our itihas is obviously going to give us sayd for our pavik and everything. But I mean in terms of the nitty-gritty controversies or people who just have random doubts. We don't need to convince them anymore because it's a waste of our time. We have to understand that India, it takes us as significant enough of a threat that they are sending their agents to assassinate a Canadian citizen on foreign soil. So ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕ ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਰੌਲਾ ਪਾਉਂਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ there is no support for Khalistan and ਮੁੱਠੀ ਭਰ ਲੋਕ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, they're on the fringe. If we were truly just on the fringe, why would India pretty much ਸਾਰਾ ਕੁਝ ਦਾਅ ਤੇ ਲਾ ਕੇ risk killing and murdering a foreign citizen and risking the blowback that it has resulted in, especially kind of given where it's at right now? What we need to understand is the support and the groundswell for Khalistan on the ground in Punjab and the diaspora is overwhelming. And on top of that, India understands that threat and understands the sensitivity of the threat. Looking at our kind of geopolitical landscape in that region in South Asia, India is, especially under Modi, like Jaz, you were saying, India is kind of advancing, kind of completing this arc towards this idea of a Hindu Rashtra. Because of that, there is also a lot of internal tension with Kashmiris, with Manipuris, with Dalits, with Muslims, with people in South India, with liberals within India, with leftists within India. There are massive fractures and fault lines within the Indian state right now. So even during the Kisan Morcha, when it was happening, you had intelligence agencies, you had generals in the army, and you had the political establishment coming out very strongly and clearly pushing the Modi government to recall the farm reforms, because they said very explicit and in no uncertain terms that je hon tusi Sikhan nal panga liya, we're not going to survive. So one is the internals, the situation, and on the other side, you have to look at the fact that there is tensions on the borders, there has been with Pakistan, and there is consistently with China right now. Is if India right now cannot survive having external tensions on its border and having to fight an external war and dealing with internal discontent, especially on its borderlands in a strategic place like Punjab, which is a major supply line for India's army into Kashmir and regions that are kind of disputed with China, and for trade routes, land routes that go into Central Asia right now. So that's understanding that our enemy is taking us so seriously that they are risking everything to muzzle us, to shut us down and repress us. ਸੋ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਇਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਬਹੁਤਾ ਮਾਣ ਵੀ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਹੌਸਲਾ ਵੀ ਮਹਿਸੂਸ ਹੋਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਪਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀ ਬਣਦੀ ਆ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸੁਚੇਤ ਹੋਣ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਆ। ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਦੂਜੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈਗੀ is understanding that there's conversations in the UN and every major media outlet and within every single government right now talking about us. So this, we constantly have a victim mindset, and we look at ourselves ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਦਿਸੱਦੇ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੇ, the horizons of the conversations we have, we're looking for scraps as a minority community within these foreign countries. As you know, we're British Sikhs and we're minorities, we're Canadian Sikhs, we're a minority, and we're kind of hoping that, maybe we'll get some scraps to help our survival a little bit. It's important for us to shift that mindset and understand that Guru Khalsa Panth ਇੱਕ ਆਪਣੇ global politics ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਧਿਰ ਆ, that we have an open seat at the table if we're capable and committed to actually taking that seat and kind of maximizing and leveraging the opportunities that are before us today. So it's getting out of this mindset. We're not citizens and minorities of these countries. We are a Ghulam Qawm that's living in exile, fighting a Sangharsh for our liberation and establishment of Khalistan. And when we look at our interactions with our local governments, when we look at interactions with external media, other stakeholders and opinion makers, that's the confidence and attitude we need to take into those rooms and into those conversations. That we're not trying to convince them anymore to sympathize with us a little bit. I think it's confidently, like by Devinderjeet Singh said, is raising this idea of Khalistan, and this is a very reasonable issue. And if Western countries are looking at South Asia, when you're looking at the instability within India right now, we can also pitch and frame our liberation and our state and the decentralization of power within South Asia as a win-win for countries who are looking for trade and political power and influence in that region.
Absolutely. I mean, talking about the geopolitics, then, I mean, do we see 3 elections coming up in the near future? The UK, Canada, I believe, and we know that India is going to be having a general election as well. So, how's this going to impact the Sikh diaspora, the communities within those nations? Then, because some of the argument about the demonization of the Sikh by the BJP has always been seen as a sort of tactic to gel a country together against a common enemy, and that's one sort of one of the comments that we often read out there. But by Devinderjeet Singh, I mean, you understand politics quite well. I mean, where do we stand, and how will we be used in these elections?
But in terms of politics, it's very easy to talk about elections in India, UK, Canada. But actually, where I'm going to start off is actually doesn't matter to us at one level. And the reason why I say that is, building on what we said, ultimately, we are freedom-loving people. We're a Qawm that stands for freedom more than any other community, because that's what Guru Sahib taught us. And if we keep that in our minds, in our hearts, and in our actions, which I think we do, but we sometimes are afraid to tell people about it, then I think when you talk about establishing a homeland Khalistan, actually the biggest benefit to the Sikh community over the last decade has been the BJP and Hindutva. It's turned people's minds to say, this is classic of what's happening in India. We can already predict what will happen in elections, because there is no longer a democracy in India. It's an autocracy. I was hearing Jeevan Singh Sethi from university in America giving an interview, very eloquently put that, it's an authoritarian state. They have dismantled the opposition. They have dismantled the press. They have dismantled NGOs like Amnesty International, the BBC. We've seen today the reaction to the BBC covering and putting us on radio and television, they have just said BBC are all for Khalistanis. Let them do it. I think they are doing us huge favours by turning institutions and actually governments against them. And it's only a matter of time that doesn't matter, I think in India, it's a foregone conclusion who will win the election. And that will be a boost to our demand for a Sikh homeland. And I think similarly in the UK, where, we do focus on Sikh MPs, and I know I could talk about Canadian Sikh MPs, but I'll let Prabjot talk about that. But the point is, we are moving from a government in the last few years that had the likes of Priti Patel and Rishi Sunak in there. And anything after those two is better for us. And I think we will have probably a Labour government for a decade that will have potentially double-digit Sikh MPs. And as we know, just the two Sikh MPs we've had, the Star Tari and First Aurd, they have made a difference. But actually, they've been massively targeted by the BJP. They raise their voices about anything. They can't stand it. And today, I was reading about how, you remember that infamous speech that Justin Trudeau gave in America, where he said, I've got more Sikhs in my cabinet than Modi. That really hurt people in India. And good on Justin Trudeau for saying it. I think he just made a sarcastic comment. But the point was that it's pointless having Sikh MPs, Sikh ministers, if they don't live those Sikhi values that Guru Sahib gave us. And I think that is my one major criticism as an outsider of Sikh politicians in Canada. And I was there and I heard Prabjot speak in Toronto about Indian interference. And virtually the entire panel were very critical of people they know that are Sikh MPs, saying they don't lead in the way Guru Sahib taught every Sikh to lead, which is speak the truth, don't worry about the consequences, because Waheguru is with you. And it's been quite amusing in a way, seeing these individual Sikh MPs in Canada tweet messages and say things on the back of Justin Trudeau. But actually, if they'd been saying this when they'd been first elected, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation now. We could have had this conversation years ago. So I think we need to look at politics, what's happening in India, the UK and Canada, through slightly different lenses. But never forget, we are a freedom-loving people. And the day that the world understands that, they will know we are there for Sarbat Tapala.
Mm-hmm. Jazz, you want to add to that? Is there anything you want to talk about the
Yeah,
politics?
I think one thing that connects what both Prabjot and Dabindiji said is what also going back to what Justin Trudeau said is that this was a complete attack on the sovereignty of Canada, and that's how they looked at it: the sovereignty of their nation, their people. And you've since then had the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, David Lammy, the Americans and the Australians come up and defend Canada to protect its sovereignty. And then on the flip side, you have India, who completely overreact and miss the point. And in their blindness of over patriotism, they then consider their sovereignty is being attacked. But actually, in all of this, the sovereignty that really matters is the sovereignty of the Sikhs. And that's what they've all overlooked, and that's what's been attacked. It just happens to be attacked in Canada. No one attacked Canada or went to assassinate a Canadian because of the Canadian politics or Canadian demands. It was because he was a Sikh, and he was a campaigner for Sikh sovereignty and Khalistan. That's the root cause of this. And I think out of all of this, it's that realization and that confidence to say, you know what, we are a sovereign nation. We are looking to re-establish our kingdom and our homeland. And in it, we will flourish, and as will everyone else. And I think that's been the greatest threat to India, that the only way it can challenge that, because it can't challenge it on a legal basis. It can't challenge it on a historical basis. It can't challenge it on an international law that's ours, and it belongs to the Sikhs, and it's a democratic right for us to campaign for it. The only way it can challenge it is to twist it and turn it into an act of terror, which is what it's been doing for 40 years. But it's now the veil has been lifted, and I say the truth will come out, and it is coming out now. I think what we need to create, and Baji's point on MPs is really vital, because Justin Trudeau stood up and spoke the truth as he saw it and as he was briefed on it. Now, he will have his own motives of doing so, but ultimately there is still truth in that. And even in this country, Sikh politicians and paper-based Sikh organizations were all silent. If anything, they were there under the covers, hiding behind it as soon as the government started to demonize us in this country, whether it was the Bloom Review, the Shawcross Review, with this new coined phrase of pro-Khalistani extremism. All of these Sikh representatives ran for the hills. You couldn't find one for love nor money. And now they start to creep out, but they wait for others to set the tone, and those others are non-Sikhs. We saw it with the Juggy case, that it took a Scottish MP, Martin Doherty Hughes, to challenge India directly. He called them out in the House of Commons in Westminster, and he's continued to do so. And then suddenly others get a bit more courage. And I think that lack of confidence and that maybe insecurity has crept into our community as well, and into our gurdwaras as well. Because rarely from a gurdwara stage are you hearing about our challenges, the threats that we face, or the opportunities and how we're going to tackle them and take them on. And that's our basis. And it's great that PBC, and we have this channel, that we're able to share this with the Sangat. But ultimately, that duty and that responsibility does become our own. We are too comfortable in looking at somebody else to do the seva. Somebody else will do that. Somebody else will lobby the politicians. Somebody else will write to the media. Somebody else will attend the protests. So essentially, this is our duty. No one is going to do it for us. If we want Khalistan, we're going to have to fight for it. We're going to have to campaign for it. And that's every one of us together. So I think, if anything, we take lessons and inspiration from global movements, but we have to get on the ride. I mean, Trudeau isn't going to create anything for the Sikhs. He's doing it to protect his citizens and its own constitution. That opportunity that's out there is on now for global Sikhs to stand up in their own countries and those in Punjab and India to actually challenge the status quo and say absolutely with defiance that this is our sovereign right, it's our birthright, and it's in compliance with all international law. We are campaigning democratically, peacefully for our sovereign homeland, and if we are challenged, then that needs to be called out, and we should not be demonized, and we should not shy away from it. And this is something I really think, as we come up to the 40th anniversary of the Sikh genocide in 1984, this is something that we do need to open up more about and talk about openly, because, as Prabhjot Singh said, over the last 3 years, I think the realization and the acceptance of being a Khalistani has become more and more normalized. And I think really people need to look at themselves now, really what being a Khalistani means, what does it entail, and where are they? Because you can't keep looking to others to tell you what your sovereignty should look like and what it should be and what you're entitled to. We have to define it. We have to set the parameters for it, and then we have that seat at that table, and we enter into those discussions. But we're too quick to concede, to compromise, or to give up and say it's really too difficult. And I think that's a Bamari, that's this concept we need to really shake off, because otherwise we'll miss these big opportunities that are here now.
Yeah, I think you're definitely. I mean, I agree with you there, and there's an element of fear And I suppose it's a good point to bring the threats in as well, particularly as the clips going viral about by the Binderjit Singh in the BBC interview, where we saw this BBC presenter's jaw drop when she found out that there's this thing called an NIA hit list, and it's literally in the public domain, and something that we've sort of become numb to because we've been reading about, seeing it. We've seen the sort of ridiculous crass reporting on Indian TV. But this is, for the Western media, this is a bit of an eye opener that these things exist out there, and this is the kind of stuff we have to go through. But these imminent threats that we have at this point in time to people's safety, certain individuals have been named, or we'll talk about that. Then we have the softer threats that come in the form of Bloom reviews and reports and things like that, which seem to have foreign interference, which demonize the Sikhs.
Yeah, I mean,
Bhai, should I?
yeah, go for it, buddy. I was going to say,
I was going to say we probably need to wrap up in 5 minutes, so it's probably final comments.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I would say is you asked Prabhjot the question about, will this fizzle over, etc., in terms of what's happening in Canada. And I think he was absolutely right. This is going to be around for a very, very long time. And the reason why it's going to be around for a very long time is simply the idiots that are running India. They won't let it go away. And on the other side, it would be the freedom-loving Sikhs that will be talking about this and acting upon it. So I thought I'd finish on the comment that following 9/11, you probably remember those T-shirts, "Don't freak, I'm a Sikh." I think we need to change that language to say, "Don't freak, we're Khalistanis, we're freedom-loving people." That's the sort of objective we need to set ourselves and let the world really look up to the Sikh Kong.
Mm-hmm. Prabhjot Singh, I mean,
just to add in,
yeah,
I think Bob can have the final comment, I think, on the show. I think just on the hit list, I think that was an important thing that has really sparked the interest of the media. I mean, I was speaking to the Times reporter this afternoon, and again, just couldn't believe and repeatedly asking, "You sure it's a hit list? Is it on? Is it a video? Was it on TV?" And when you share it, they immediately call you back and think, "Is this real?" I said, "Yeah, there's 6 of them in the UK. 3 of them have been eliminated. Panjit Singh Panjwar, Bhai Hardeep Singh Nijjar, and Avtar Singh Khanda. And there are 6 in the UK. And we're going to arrange to speak to one of those tomorrow. But this is a serious threat, and I think the biggest question mark over the British government, it'll be interesting to hear what Canada's like, is that they've failed to act. The intelligence services, the police, and the government know this is happening. They know Avtar was at risk. They know other activists have been targeted in this way, have yet to reach out or provide any assurance to them or any safety. And that's something that the British government are going to have to deal with. As a community, we protect ourselves, but they have a duty of care to every citizen. And I think this is going to come out in the next day or two.
Prabhjot Singh?
Yes, I think to kind of end off, I think in Panthic spaces for a long time, ਆਪਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਸੁਣਨ ਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ 47 ਦੀ ਗਲਤੀ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨੀ. That, that 1947 with the transfer of power in South Asia was a huge opportunity, and the Sikhs kind of missed out at that moment, and that we're not going to make that same mistake again. I think what's important for us, ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਪੰਥਕ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਆ, ਸੁਣ ਰਹੇ ਆ, ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਦਿਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਿਠਾ ਲਵੋ ਵੀ 47 ਵਰਗਾ ਮਾਹੌਲ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਣ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ. ਹੁਣ ਸਵਾਲ ਇਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਗਲਤੀ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ, ਸਵਾਲ ਇਹ ਹੋਣਾ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਸਾਂਭਣ ਜੋਗੇ ਬਣਾਂਗੇ ਕਿ ਨਹੀਂ, ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਬਣਨਾ ਅੱਜ ਨਹੀਂ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੋਢਿਆਂ ਤੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ is understanding that there are massive shifts happening locally and regionally within South Asia and geopolitically on the world stage as well. We are a actor. We are a tir that's kind of going on within this churning. We have a seat at the table. We have to have the confidence, the commitment, and the foresight to demand that seat at that table and take it. And so as all of these things are unfolding, this is still just like I think Jazz was saying, this is the tip of the iceberg. There's going to be a lot of chaos. There's going to be a lot of instability. Within that, what's going to be imperative is whether we're kind of up to the mark and ready to kind of shoulder that responsibility or not. And that's going to require on the individual level, Nambani da Abhyas, that our kind of our drirta and our jivan to be able to weather this storm as Sikhs of the Guru, and to develop our own individual skills and liaquat in different areas and develop institutions. When we're looking at this situation right now, you have these conversations happening about us, about our Naujawan being killed and the pretty much the future and what's going to happen in our homeland in Punjab. Our response, unfortunately, so far has been it's been amazing compared to what it's been in the past, but there's room for a lot of improvement. Our response so far has been giname totame tirike de naal in our local areas, local organizations speaking on behalf of these local issues. On that next stage, if we want to get onto that global stage, what kind of institutions, what kind of infrastructure do we need to establish a homeland and a state? And what are all the steps that kind of come in between on the way and the path leading there? What do we need in terms of our political advocacy? What do we need in terms of institutions that can deal with media? You mentioned the Bloom report. Like there is a sustained kind of process of knowledge production within academia and think tanks. We had the Hudson Institute in the US, McDonald-Laurie Institute releasing a report in Canada. We have academics working by government funded studying Khalistani extremism in Canada. We have the Bloom report and other reports about the threats of Sikh nationalism. All of this is to pretty much support and enable these foreign states to repress and clamp down on us when the opportunity arises. So we shouldn't be under this kind of misunderstanding that these states are our friends, or that Trudeau did something amazing for us and that everything is good for us right now. We have to read the writing on the wall and understand which direction our future is going into, and shoulder that responsibility of determining our own destiny in our future. And that's going to be through Qurbani, it's going to be through Uddam, it's going to be through Seva. The most important thing, Maharaj di mehr hove, te Maharaj de mehr de patar ban di ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕਦਮ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਆਪੋ ਆਪਣੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਆਪੋ ਆਪਣੀ ਨਿੱਜੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੀਵਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਸ ਗੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਨੂੰ ਗੁਰਮਤ ਦੇ ਰੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਢਾਲਣ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰੀਏ.
Thank you. I think it's a powerful and profound place to end this discussion. So, Prabjot Singh ji, thank you for your time from all the way from Canada. Jas Singh and Dabindajit Singh, thank you. I know you've been both busy as well with your media around. So, thank you all for your contribution. Thank you, BBC, for broadcasting this special show today as well. Waheguru ji ka Khalsa,
ਖਾਲਸਾ
Waheguru ji ki
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ
Fateh.
ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ